All right, welcome back to Family Twist. It's been a minute since we've dived into the world of donor conception, but trust me, we're making up for lost time today. Our guest, Natalie, has a story that's got everything: secrets, shock, identity revelations, and, of course, a dramatic Harry Potter moment that I absolutely need more details on. Natalie, we're so excited to have you here. Your journey to discovering the full picture of your DNA is wild, and I know our listeners are going to be hooked. Natalie, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So it's been a little while since we've done a donor conceived themed episode, and we've met some fascinating people. But if you wouldn't mind just sort of recapping your discovery, we would love to hear about it.
Definitely. So currently I'm 24, so I've had a little bit of distance from this and done a lot of healing. So this is a more fun story to tell now, and I can do it a lot more concisely these days. 2 months before my 18th birthday, a couple weeks after I graduated high school, my parents sat me and my triplet siblings down. My parents, who are divorced, they sat me and my triplet siblings down. And my mom said, I'm a really big fan of Harry Potter. And she goes, this is your Harry Potter moment. So when she said that, I was like, wizardry is definitely real. Hogwarts letter got lost by some poor owl. Like, something's happening. And so we were just kind of sitting there and we were like, what is going on? And my parents started switching off and telling us different stories. We knew that we were IVF babies since we were like 12. Like, that's not something I even remember finding out about. And they were just telling us different things. And then they were like, okay, so we used an egg donor to have you guys. And the three of us are like, oh my God. And then because my parents are interesting people, they said, can you guess who it is? So there's 2 girls and a guy in this triplet set. And so me and my brother are like in shock, no thoughts, just shock. And then my sister, who's sitting on my right, just like thinks for a second and then guesses immediately. My mom's best friend, who, you have those like family friends who you call aunt and uncle, even though you're not related to them. It was one of our aunts, or our mom's best friend. And we had known them our entire lives. We'd known her, her husband, her 4 children. And also an important detail, both of my parents are Filipino immigrants. That was a big part of my identity growing up. I looked in the mirror and I was like, that's a Filipino, you know what I mean? And especially growing up in the Midwest, where I had a very clear understanding of race and where I fit into that. Growing up, since I was very little, my dad would always tell me, you have to be better to be equal. That was what his dad told him. That's what he told us. So I had a very clear understanding, at least what I thought, of how I fit into everything. And this egg donor is white. So that was a really big wrench in the whole identity thing. And so that was pretty much the revelation story. A fun little detail is that our cousins, our family friends, the 4 of them, they knew that they were our half siblings, but they were sworn to secrecy. So that's like some crazy details, and like, yeah, kind of the revelation story is pretty concise.
Now, how old are they in relation to you?
All 4 of them are older than us. I was born in 2000. The 4 of them were born 91, 93, 95, and 96.
I can't even imagine being able to keep that kind of a secret.
Yeah.
And I guess I come from a family where, like, don't tell my mom or my sister anything because it is going to be out to the world in 2 seconds. So
I love that.
But wow, like, what a crazy thing to hold it. I mean, I've got 3 siblings that I can't tell are my siblings. That's wild.
It's a whole thing. I mean, it's also like when I tell people this story, right, and everybody's minds are going 100 different directions. Can I clarify this? Can I clarify this? It's really interesting to think about all of that. And I also have an older sister who I was raised with, who is the biological child of both of my parents. But she is disabled, and that also plays into why we were donor conceived. It was because the doctors told my parents that my mom shouldn't have any more biological children because it would risk having the same disability that my older sister was born with. So yeah, and it's really interesting to talk about my older sister, and then people are like, which one? And I'm like, the one that I was raised with.
Well, do you have any animosity toward your biological mother's other kids for not telling you?
No, I think all of us have a pretty clear understanding of whose role that was, whose place it was to tell it. And there really isn't any animosity there. I have asked them about it. I was like, were you guys ever thinking of like going to tell us? And They tell me that they knew it wasn't their place to tell us. But as they started thinking about it more and all of us started growing up, my triplet sister actually went to the same college as one of my older half brothers. They knew that we'd be seeing each other more often as well. They never definitively said whether or not they would tell us, but it's simmering. Yeah.
So, and I imagine you saw them a lot growing up because it was your mom's best friend. How did they treat you as a little kid? Like, did they treat you like a cousin or like a sibling or like friends?
I don't know. That's a really interesting question because I'm a triplet, right? People are like, what's it like to be a triplet? And that's the only thing I know, right? So my understanding of, even then, we joke that I'm the firstborn. I'm the oldest by a minute. So a minute, right? But within the triplets, I'm very much older sister. My brother, who's the middle child, is very middle child. The youngest, my sister, youngest by 2 minutes, you know what I mean? But she very much fits that younger sister vibe. But that's also just my understanding of that. But I didn't really have somebody who's 2 years older than me.
Right.
I mean, my older sister who I was raised with is 3 years older than me. But because she's disabled, she's like tube fed and that kind of thing. I was very much like helping out, take care of her. But in to answer your question about my half sibling cousins, you know what I mean? Especially when we were growing up, we like spent a lot of Christmases together. All of us have this like, we have this like, not weird obsession, but this nostalgic attachment to the Polar Express, because that's kind of what I know people get like, what is it? Uncanny Valley from it. But like the nostalgia value to me is much too high for me. Like I can ignore that. And we have like those memories together. Incidentally, though, there was about 8, 9, 10 years that we didn't really see each other. The chalked up to us being very busy, that kind of thing. But I have my, for lack of a better term, suspicions about what went into that decision to not really see each other as often. What's interesting is that we have Instagram to thank for reconnecting us, because my parents, as the responsible parents they were, I didn't trust them at the time with this decision, but the responsible parents that they were told me and my triplet siblings that we could not get Instagram accounts until we were 18. We did not respect that. However, I respect that they wanted us to do that. But my triplet sister and I got Instagram accounts when I think we were 14 or something. And one day it occurred to us that we could start cyber stalking people. You know what I mean? And we looked up our cousins in Instagram and we ended up finding them. And within I remember I was like sitting in my room, like just about to go to sleep. My lights were off. And my sister like bolts into my room and like flops on my bed. And she's like, I found them. And I was like, who? Like, I'm just trying to go to sleep. And she showed me their Instagram. I logged into my Instagram, followed them. And within maybe like 10 minutes, we had like a group chat of me, my triplet sister, my triplet brother, and then my 4 cousins. So that was really cool. Yeah.
Have you been able to maintain like relationships with them? I mean,
yeah, it's been really nice. The tough thing was that for me, like all my triplet siblings and 3 out of 4 of my half siblings were all local to Michigan. And then I threw myself off the deep end and went to Los Angeles. And then my oldest half sibling was also out of state. And so it's one of the things that I do kind of miss, or like I felt like I missed out on, in the sense where I couldn't really start building that relationship as siblings because I was so far away from home. And then the pandemic hit, so I wasn't able to travel back and forth as much. But the wonderful thing about the internet and the fact that I am so close with my triplet siblings who were able to forge deeper relationships, because my triplet sister went to school with one of my half brothers for a year, 2 years, I forget. But yeah, we've been able to have really good relationships. And just recently over Christmas, I spent a week with them, which was great. And that was actually the longest uninterrupted amount of time we had spent with each other in a couple of years. So that was really fun.
Yeah. I know questions play a big part of your story.
Yes.
From one journalist to another, I totally understand having questions, because I'm like, my favorite thing in the world is what we're doing right now. I love interviewing people. So, anybody, whatever.
I hear you.
So did you ask your parents why they chose the 18th birthday time to disclose that?
Of course I did. I hear you. I'm a chronic intellectualizer, if you will. And so I just wanted to understand everything. I wanted to see the records. I wanted to see everything, because I've seen my birth certificate. My mother is listed on the birth certificate. So I knew that wasn't a representation of my biological parents. So I wanted to see everything. granted, as I'm sure you guys know, like there isn't a lot of like, there's no database and there's no like super intense record keeping. I mean, one of the things that I think that my parents did really right was the fact that they had a known donor. So like in that regard, maybe I wasn't able to get access to the records or anything like that, but I did have access to her, which was really, really like, I am very thankful for that. But yeah, I asked them why a lot, especially my mother, because I lived with her. But I feel like lots of donor conceived people get these answers. Like, we didn't think that you were ready. We didn't think you'd understand. We never had time, like all these things. And I mean, I think there's some validity to that. And like, I have a lot of empathy for my parents. Like, who was sitting down parents at the time and being like, so you guys should really think about how to disclose this, you know? Maybe it doesn't really take a genius to know that maybe you shouldn't have your kids guess, but it makes an interesting story. So I can't blame. I don't necessarily like it's a funny story. Like I appreciate it for what it is. But yeah, like I wrote a story recently where I talked about how I asked my mother these why questions so many times. And like, I always felt like there was something more that she wasn't telling me. I know that there's some things that I just don't understand, or like empathy can only take me so far. But I think that it had a lot to do with an element of shame around using assisted reproductive technologies and stuff like that. And I think my educated guess is that was a contributing factor, and that really just caused a lot of emotional tension within the household. But yeah.
What was your relationship like with your mother?
My relationship with my mother was, I think, very stereotypical daughter of immigrants kind of thing. Just like, I wouldn't necessarily categorize her as like a tiger parent, but like it was very clear from a young age. These are the expectations, like getting good grades. My mother's an amazing pianist. That is like one thing I'm like, she's an amazing pianist. And I remember growing up and I was like, oh my God, like if her blood runs through mine, why can I not play piano the way she can? You know what I mean? And I practiced a lot. And I look back now and I'm like, dang, like my 18-year-old pianist self could run circles around me currently. But yeah, I feel like we had I feel like every eldest daughter, granted, I'm not technically the eldest daughter, but effectively, I feel like I was. I feel like the stereotypical like eldest daughter always butting heads with their mother, but I still like I love her. I still love her, and it had its ups and downs. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So we've obviously read about your story, and but you could probably put it into clearer light. Like, how did it go from here's the situation to like you got to stop asking me questions, and how things got really difficult?
Yeah, it was, I don't know. I think it was just so many moving parts. The three of us had just graduated high school. The three of us were going to go on our way to college. I was throwing myself off the deep end, 2,000 miles away from home. My parents had recently gotten divorced, and just like so many things were changing. And it's also like my older sister does require intensive care, and my mother is the primary caregiver for her. And I can imagine that she was kind of panicking because she was losing us, like a big source of help. And so I think just like so many things stacking on top of each other, I was still an angsty teenager and not really knowing how to vocalize and how to process it. It was really hard. And it was just like, there was just so many things going on that when I kept like asking why, I think she just kept hearing rejection. And I think that was just something that's like really scary when society is consistently telling you that you are not the real parent. I can imagine that even if your kids aren't saying that to you, there's something in the back of your mind that's trying to get in front of the rejection before it actually happens. And so I think that was just a really big contributing factor to our relationship kind of devolving. And then eventually my mom kicked me out like 4 days before my birthday. So that was fun.
Yeah.
I have a lot of empathy towards her. It's really like, would you ever have triplets? You know what I mean? Like, I'm a triplet. Would I ever have triplets? The answer is no. Like, I love being a triplet, but I could not imagine raising them. You know what I mean? Like, I tease my parents about like, why didn't you guys teach us Bisaya, which is the language that my parents were raised speaking in the Philippines. And I get it. If you have 3 rugrats running around, do you have time to speak to them in 2 languages? No.
Probably
You're going to
not.
talk to them in the first language and hope they understand it and get it the first time, you know? But yeah, I think I answered that question.
No, we've got a niece and nephew, and I just remember like my sister raised them, but they were not her natural children, but just like taking them on excursions by myself. Oh my gosh.
Right.
4 years old was crazy. Oh my gosh. We took them to go see the Nutcracker, like a Broadway like thing. And we didn't have seats together. So Kendall was with Jonna and I was a few rows back with Jake. Jake is super fidgety. Like, you don't take a 4-year-old to the Nutcracker.
Right.
He's right. I just thought, oh, that'd be fun. He was very, very fidgety. And then all of a sudden not fidgety. And he starts snoring like loud. So we're
A
like
4-year-old?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah,
Like loud.
yeah. And so we got to intermission. We met up and I was like, we gotta go. Yeah. We gotta go. Sorry.
So true. So true.
Yeah, I kind of understand that. Yeah. Did the other 2 have some of the same feelings and did they have the same relationship problems with your mother?
I think it's the kind of thing where it's like I'm kind of not thrusting myself into the spotlight or anything, but out of the 3 of us, I'm the one who's like writing my thesis about it and being a lot more outspoken. So I really like signed up for that. They didn't, and they've been really generous and really like amazing, like in terms of I don't really want to say letting, but in a lot of ways, this is their story as well. And so the permission that they've been able to, the grace that they've given me in terms of how much I've been able to be outspoken about this has been really amazing.
Do you have a kind of parental-child relationship with your biological mother now? Or
That's a good question. I don't really see her as a parent. It is funny. I don't call her aunt anymore because that just feels weird. But also, like, mom is not the title that I would associate with her. It's just kind of like a weird middle ground, you know? They don't have a name for it yet. But yeah, I have a great relationship with her. I wouldn't call it parental, more as maybe like godmother-esque. But yeah, it's really nice to have like that like senior woman figure in my life, very much like an aunt, even though I wouldn't call her that.
Right.
But yeah, it's been really nice. I call her sometimes. She helps me with my taxes, which is great. But yeah.
I can't even imagine like what that would have been like for her as you were babies and toddlers and seeing you and stuff and just knowing like technically, you know, these are my children. And but not being able to acknowledge that, or I don't know. Have you ever talked to her about that, like how she felt seeing you kids grow up?
I haven't been able to really ask her explicitly. My understanding of it, and I think she's been really gracious about it, is that when she's always says that she gifted, this was like a gift to them. She didn't get paid for it or anything like that. And it was just the kind of thing where she trusted them and she was like, here's this gift. I respect nothing in return. And those were the children for my parents to raise. And I think like everybody's families are different. And I know that lots of donor conceived people have different perspectives on how to look at their biological parents. But I personally, for me, like I have no complaints about that. And I think I'm not a scientist. I can't say what's healthier or not, but at least the way that I see it, like I really appreciate that she saw it as that. And I think that with that understanding, I think that has been really invaluable and is something that I think has created a lot less confusion in the sense of like, I know lots of donor conceived parents do have like, I don't know if insecurities is the right word, but like, or paranoia or like hesitancies, I guess you could say. Yeah. Concern about that. And I think that that was a really big blessing.
One of the things that we've decided to do with this podcast is to be really, really open to everybody's perspectives because everybody's story is different. Like the only thing that we will take a hard stance on is Kendall's specific journey, because that's the only thing that we can really, truly, say like this is what we believe.
Right.
So have you gotten sort of involved with the donor conception community, and what are your feelings on the donor conception world as it stands now?
That's a good question. I have gotten involved. It's funny. Right after I found out, I turned to the internet because I was like, somebody tell me how to feel. I do not know what's going on right now. And I guess 17-year-old me was just not internet savvy because I did not find the We Are Donor Conceived Facebook group until I was like 22. But finding that was really interesting to me. And I was like, oh, there are other people like this. Through that Facebook group, I was able to find this. It's like a crazy alphabet soup of BIPOC DCP. But because being a person of color who is donor conceived is such a minority and such a niche experience, that was also really cool to connect with those people. I learned a lot about the donor conceived experience through talking to more people within this community and just reading Facebook posts. I didn't realize that it was so uncommon to have a known donor. I didn't realize it was pretty uncommon to be egg donor conceived. Like logistically, you could figure that out, but that didn't register. And I was just like, wow, like I really am blessed to, like, I don't walk around thinking, oh my God, is that my sibling? And like, granted, is there like a little dystopian voice in the back of my head where they're like, did they save an embryo and give it to somebody else? But like the likelihood is like significantly less than I know a lot of other people are. And so in that way, I've learned a lot. As an angsty 17, 18-year-old, I had a lot of resentment towards my parents and a lot of anger. But in getting more connected with the community, I realized that there was like so many things that they did right. Having access to my biological mother, namely being one of them, just in that way, I think it also gave me a lot of appreciation for my parents that I might not have necessarily been able to see before because I was just so unwell. Like in terms of the donor conceived world as a whole, that was also another thing that I was able to tap into of like how crooked the industry is. And the fact that like it's an industry in the first place, like that is just such a weird thing to be dealing with in terms of lives. Somebody told me one time where it's like, just like something I think about a lot. And if people want to get like the quick rundown of my thoughts on the industry, it's like the only people not signing the anonymity agreement is the person who's yielded from that. And I think that's something that really like people are able to latch onto and they're like, oh, that's weird. And so like the other things that kind of like grow out of that in terms of anonymity, like incredibly large sibling groups, the whole debate of whether or not there should be a database, because on one hand, you want to know everything, but also at the same time, it's like, do queer people especially want to be put in a database, especially with this current administration? Like, it's such a weird thing to be thinking about all the time. And sometimes I get on my soapbox and I just like, my mouth just goes and I can just see people's faces as they are like, oh my God, I thought this was just for the documentary Our Father on Netflix. I didn't realize that it was just everything else, you know? But yeah, does that answer your question?
No, it does. Yeah. And I know I'll backpedal a little bit because I'm saying we don't necessarily take a hard stance on stuff, but as we become educated about we had no idea that like how many times they can split up a sample and how many sperm, or how many families. And yeah, it's unbelievable. And we've had, several guests on that have been very enlightening and stuff. And it's, again, we're open to all perspectives on the show, but it's like, it gets hard to not, to think like somebody should be able to find their medical history. Like you've had access to that, which is great. But I mean, so many people don't. And it's just like, you don't know if you're allergic to something. We've heard some horror stories,
Yeah.
And I know a lot of the people who are very outspoken in the donor conceived community are trying to make lemonade out of lemons, and great for them. But it's got to be tough. I'm thinking right now of donor Dylan, who's gone to meet dozens and dozens of his offspring, but I can't imagine day to day having that reality. It just seems so surreal.
Yeah, surreal is definitely the way to describe it. And yeah, it's just like you said, like there's so much diversity in the experience. And it is just like, I keep learning stuff every day. People hear my story and they're like, I've never heard anything like it. And I'm like, me neither. There's only 2 other people that have this experience and I'm related to them. And just even the stuff that I learned, like sometimes I'll hear somebody's story and then I just go immediately call my siblings or just one of my friends who's familiar with the story. So that way I don't need to keep explaining the vernacular to them. And just like, whoa. Yeah.
Both making points, because even for myself, having no history of my family, I had some, somewhat invasive procedures done earlier in my life because I didn't, you know what I mean? Like there was this fear that I better make sure that, I understood the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you have at least some baseline of information about your family, it helps,
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Kendall clearly must have had some allergies and stuff early on because it was very difficult for his adoptive parents to find a formula that he could rely on. So his weight fluctuated as an infant, and that's a dangerous situation.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And they felt inept when really they were just doing the best they could.
Right.
Right.
They got
Right.
this as I got older and said, I bet you guys wish you could have traded me in. Like I was, what I mean? I feel like I was,
Yeah.
they joked and they were like, you did have some things going on, but that's what we signed up for,
Fortunately,
Yeah.
we've got a nice collection of photos of when Kendall was little, and there's only a couple of them where this, it looks like the baby's a little sick, and then all of a sudden this kid is thriving.
Oh yeah.
And clearly, and we talk about this on the podcast all the time, but like we like his adoptive parents are just, just we we think of them back to the moon and back, just
Yeah.
because how amazing they were.
Yeah.
But it's, well, my
Yeah.
goodness. So one thing I'm curious about is like, how did you feel about reckoning your ethnicity with this, discovering that you're, half white?
The question of the ages. Yeah, it was really tough. I think I still don't really have a grasp on how I appear phenotypically to people. It's funny, one of my friends in, I think, my sophomore year of high school, my school was still majority white, but lots of the people of the same ethnicities started grouped together. There were no Filipinos in my school. So I grouped together with a lot of the Asians. It was mostly Chinese and Indian that were at my school. I remember I had a friend who was Chinese. And one time we were just in our friend group and I mentioned that I was Filipino. I don't remember why. But then he looked at me and he was like, what? And I was like, is this news? I don't understand. And he was like, I thought you were the one weird white kid who hung out with all the Asians. And I was like, what do you mean? I was borderline offended. I don't mean this disparagingly, but I was like, what do you mean? And all my friends and I were like, yo, how can you, that girl's Filipino. What do you mean? You're weird. And I think it was also because he had recently lived in China. So it was really interesting because that was the first time where anybody had ever kind of looked at me and was like, because I was used to people mistaking me for literally any other beige. You know what I mean?
Really? Yeah.
And so it was really weird. And that was the first and only person who had ever said something about me being white. So I just wrote it off. And then 2 years later, here we are. But
Wow.
It's really interesting though, because I think, and even then, I have had a lot of my own ignorance growing up where I would look at people who are half Filipino and be like, you're not really Filipino, and comeuppance, methinks. But it was really a boot camp in teaching me the distinction between race, ethnicity, culture, and that kind of thing, and how for most people, those things line up. For a long time, I thought they lined up for me. And there is a lot of weird gatekeepiness. And I kind of, in a lot of ways, I understand it. I used to be on that side. I say sometimes that I've lived my life as a full and half Filipino, even though I have my qualms with what it means to quantify race and ethnicity. And that's something that I've only really gotten wise to because it became directly applicable to me. And so, it's really interesting to go through the world like this. And I've had a lot of more illuminating conversations with people who are mixed. It's really interesting because I don't want to say race is a social construct. We all know this, but it's not that it doesn't have material effects. You know what I mean? And so as much as I want to distance myself from whiteness in the sense of that is not how I was raised. That is not what I know. That is that's not my home life. But how I show up in the world, I've gotten profiled by the TSA. The TSA loves me. They love me. Border Control loves me. You know what I mean? But also I still have no grasp on whether or not my genetic makeup has influenced the way that I appear in the world. I know it's winter and I look pale as anything. It's such a fickle thing. And it's been really interesting for me to be hyper aware of that. And I have no answers. All I know is that I think it's disrespectful when people try to tell me that my real mother is my biological one. I know some people might have different feelings about that, but for me, I find it really disrespectful because I think it's invisibilizing to the culture and the family history that my mother carries. And like when people ask me who my grandparents are, that's Alfonso Jimenez and Cirilla Jimenez. You know what I mean? That's who my family is. And that's the culture. I eat this salted shrimp paste called bagoong because my grandfather did. You know, I have a very deep sense of connection to that culture and a very strong affinity to it. And it is a point of sensitivity to me when people are like, you're not real. And I was, and like in my head, I'm like, Nat, their words don't matter. Their words don't matter. But it like words do matter. I'm a journalist. I'm a writer. Like I know words matter. And so I think it's really interesting how my whole experience with race and ethnicity has really just exposed to me so much of the way that we go through the world and how people do conflate race and ethnicity, the way that people chalk up a lot of things to blood and biology. And yes, blood and biology is super important. We just talked about medical histories, right? Like that stuff is super important, but it's also not the only determinant of who somebody is.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I mean, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, but having met many people in my biological family now, Corey and I laugh all the time and say, wow, nurture in my life definitely outweighs the nature, because even though there are similarities between me and my biological siblings, I am so much my adoptive parents' kid. Like I just am. Well, you can't unlearn the things that you learned, right? And I wouldn't want to. I mean, they were fantastic parents and loved me. You know what I mean? Like they couldn't have been better parents to me. And not to say that my biological parents wouldn't have been good too, but I don't know. You know, like that wasn't my reality. And I'm so thankful for my adoptive family.
And I'm very glad to be having this conversation because just this morning, like refreshing myself with your story, I was reading one of the articles and my gut reaction toward your mother was like, how could she? How could she do this? Yeah. But then I had to pull myself back and realize and have some empathy. And like, I'm thinking like, she's probably had all these same thoughts over the years. She's had, 24 years to be thinking about all these things and, and as an immigrant, just like how important it is to like hold on to your identity.
Yeah.
But then also realize that, but my kid isn't, 100% Filipino, It's so, I mean, yeah, I definitely have some empathy for your mother, and we try not to get overtly political on the show, but because we're in the climate we are right now and everything that's happening with immigrants in the country, how do you feel about what's happening right now?
Categorically, it is just atrocious. All of it. It's really interesting to talk about like the distinctions between different immigrant populations from different parts of the world. And though, like, not to throw too much jargon out there, but though like the model minority is definitely a myth, it is still something that a lot of Asian immigrants do still benefit from, as opposed to a lot of Latin American, Central American immigrants that are facing a lot more persecution just from the countries that they come from, and especially the ones that lots of like American like interference, you know what I mean? And even then, like the Philippines is not exempt from that. The United States still views it very much as a pawn in its Pacific endeavors. And yeah, just like in general, it's just atrocious. Granted, my family's experience with immigration is a little bit distinct in the sense where my grandfather was in the Navy. One of my grandfathers was in the Navy, and the other one, he was like an engineer, and he came over while my mom was like a teenager, and then she followed. But yeah, all of that to say is just like, oh my God, history is repeating itself, and I don't know if people understand that it is happening in front of their eyes.
Being Midwesterners, and then, we moved to California, lived there for 9 years. Like we really feel like we were in a bubble. I mean, because we were surrounded by everybody. Right. There was every ethnicity there. And you get used to it and spoiled or whatever. And then moving to New England is like a slap to the face. Like, what is going on? What?
We had lived here for about a week in New England, and I was like, I forgot. And this is going to sound silly, but I was like, why are there so many white people?
I'm like, what's going on? I haven't seen a person of color yet. What's
Yeah.
going on? And you living on both coasts, I'm sure have experienced that. It's every culture, and it's amazing. I wish that it would like all seep together across the nation, because it's just so sad to see how we're devolving.
I agree with you. I think you said it perfectly, the spoiled. I was really spoiled when I went to UCLA and have LA as a way for me to experience so many different cultures. But I don't know, my friends from LA and New York tease me about this sometimes, but they tease me about the fact that I'm from the Midwest, and sometimes my accent comes out very strong. But it's really interesting to me because the coasts, I think, offer the quantity, and the quality is so much more. But sometimes I feel like because of that, those in middle America, in the Midwest, and the South can get invisibilized. One of my best friends growing up is queer, and there's this weird narrative that somehow queer people don't exist in these parts of the country. The other thing about like, oh yeah, Midwestern Asians are just like, nah, we exist, you know what I mean? And I think the broader discourse, like, I totally get it. There's the majority, and there's so much, like, there is still a lot of learning to be done, I think, in these communities. But I also think that, like, what we were talking about earlier, the Midwestern niceness, right? I think that I get a lot of my niceness from my culture, but I also think that the Midwest, like my neighbors, as much as I may politically disagree with them, and I have my own like crisis going on in that regard, but like they would be the ones to check my mail when I go on vacation. You know what I mean? And so there's definitely some people who still mix up the Philippines and the Book of Philippians, but then there's a lot of them who are also like, oh my gosh, tell me more about chicken adobo. Tell me more about dinuguan. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it is like, I definitely hear you. And it's a really interesting way to think about the spectrum that there is, and how much both middle America and the coasts have to learn from each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we just have to keep speaking out, like, we won't be erased. We will not be erased. And I do feel like we were spoiled somewhat being in the Bay Area for so long. I mean, we were exposed to, I had never been exposed to Filipino culture until we were living there. One of the things that I'm really happy to be experiencing in real time is that I mentioned going to New York with Kendall's sister and 3 of her nurse friends. And, you know, they're all from the South, and like grew up very conservative. And man, they were beating the drum for Kamala. And just really like they're outspoken because they've been traveling now, and so they've been exposed to these other cultures and stuff, and like their eyes are getting open. It's like, okay, well, if that can happen, you know, when you're middle aged, then it can happen for anybody. It's just you have to be exposed to that. You know, I feel like
definitely.
I feel like Kendall and I have like definitely touched people's lives who have never been exposed to gay people before, and all of a sudden, like, oh, okay, oh yeah, you're cool. You know, you're like.
Yeah.
Sad that it's necessary, but
it really, it is.
You.
You know, goodness. Well, we so appreciate your bravery. I mean, put your story out there, and it is amazing. We very much appreciate you. Something that we were talking about earlier, we did another recording for our other podcast today, and when we started that, we came up with the idea of a last question for every guest. And so it's I don't know if you're into horror movies at all.
A little bit. I watch like this.
So our other podcast is called Horror Heals, and it's about how horror can be good for your mental wellness. And so we ask all of our guests, who is your favorite final person from a horror movie? And, you know, Kendall and we've been together for almost 20 years, so we're very much in sync in the brain. And I'd been thinking about this, but he actually, you know, vocalized it this morning. He's like, we need to have a question for Family Twist. And I said, and there's constantly music playing in our house.
It's playing right now. You just keep hearing it.
And so I thought, how about, you know, when someone is feeling weird or depressed or having anxiety about family issues, what musician or what song do they go to help them like raise their spirits?
Great question, though. Can I cheat and go on my Spotify?
Absolutely.
Okay, slay.
Have those touch points, right?
Oh, definitely. I have like these, I date mine. And so I can go to a date and be like, ooh, I was in the trenches. You know what I mean?
I
Let me
remember
see.
January 11th.
Exactly.
Looking at it.
Oh, fantastic. I think one of my favorite artists is named Jacob Banks. He's like this British soul R&B dude, and I love him. And one of the songs that I think, I don't know, the listeners can go listen.
Absolutely.
As soon as we hang up, we're going to be going to listen.
It's called Found, and it's from an album that's called For My Friends. And I think that kind of like encapsulates it. And that's one of my favorite songs.
That is so awesome.
We're really going to be giving props to all these artists. It's
Right.
cool.
Well, and we love discovering new artists too. You know,
Yeah.
it's like we don't want to be those people that like we only listen to the stuff that we, growing up.
Right.
It's harder when you get older. And I'm just going to warn you. When you get to our age, it's
Right.
we still try to stay a little bit current.
I got you.
I couldn't name the top 10 songs in the country right now.
Me neither.
But I
But
love
wait.
seeing Bad Bunny on the SNL thing.
Love that man.
No. Well, this has been wonderful. Natalie, we love you. This is, I mean, it's not easy to just share all these details and stuff, but it's so important as we continue to grow the community to get these voices out there and normalize things. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you. I just have one question. What's your guys' answer to that question that you guys just asked, the music one?
Oh, man. I'm going to go to Robin. Dancing. What?
Ooh, great
Yeah.
choice.
I'm just like doing YouTube and finding every Jody Watley song that I could. Don't You Want Me is one of my favorites.
Ooh, but I would implore you to try this. We talk to Alexa all the time, and we stumbled upon, I forget what combination we were asking for, but we stumbled upon this playlist called 80s Electro Funk.
Ooh.
And I tell you what, if you want to be in a good mood,
It's true.
put that on.
It's
Awesome.
very good.
Love me
Yeah.
some funk.
And because it's just a great amalgam of songs. And sometimes we'll play in order and sometimes we'll play it randomly so we can hear, because it's like 4 hours long. So we have a lot of songs.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Fun stuff.
Awesome. Well, gosh, thank you so much again for doing this. This is fantastic.
Thank you guys so much for the invitation. I appreciate y'all letting me get on my soapbox.
Natalie, I got to say, your story is absolutely incredible. What really stands out to me is the way you've processed all of this with humor, self-awareness, and a genuine desire to help others in the donor-conceived community navigate their own twists and turns. That takes guts. We're so grateful you shared your story with us. And to our listeners, if you've got a family surprise, a DNA plot twist, or just an interesting connection that changed your world, hit us up. We want to hear it. The Family Twist podcast is produced by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications and presented by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.